Hello, I'm Gayle, and I'm going to talk about a project I worked on with my colleagues Andrew, Danielle, Shelaine, and Gorana on supporting academic integrity in a changing assessment landscape. I'll introduce the context and key findings of our research before discussing ways we can bridge the gap between the aims of academic integrity guidance and its use in practice. Transforming curricula and assessment is a key pillar of the university's learning and teaching strategy. We are changing the assessment landscape as students work on new types of assessment, including increased use of group work. Developing technologies also play a part as we have more online and open book exams and the availability of generative AI. So what does this mean for our approach to academic integrity? Existing research on academic integrity highlights there is already potential for confusion over plagiarism, over the rules in online exams, and in the differences between collaboration and collusion. As our assessment landscape continues to change, we need to update our understanding of student experiences of academic integrity. 626 students from the College of Social Sciences completed an online survey in which we used primarily open questions to identify barriers to and enablers of good academic practice. We also used scenarios to explore how students defined academic integrity. We also collected data from 4 focus groups with a total of 21 students. We're going to focus here primarily on qualitative data from both the survey and focus groups, which we coded using a thematic analysis approach to identify key themes. We set out to explore the newer issues that were emerging around academic integrity, but we found that perhaps more traditional concerns around referencing and textual plagiarism were still prevalent and a key theme from our respondents. Concerns included inconsistent guidance, where lecturers gave different advice on the same citation system. Whether and how to reference in exams was often unclear, particularly as requirements were different for exams in different courses. Respondents worried that poor referencing from teammates in group work would impact on their grades. There was a general sense of anxiety, which, as one respondent notes, shifted their focus to doing everything in my power to avoid plagiarism instead of actually producing high-quality texts. Both reference management software and Turnitin were perceived by some as enablers of good practice, which assisted students to organise and assess their own work. But this required clear guidance and training, which wasn't always perceived to be available. Respondents also referred to a lack of experience around academic writing as a key factor. This highlights that academic integrity is part of a wider context of academic literacies and practices of how we produce academic work, and suggests it's best addressed in that wider context. There was also confusion about the boundary between acceptable collaboration and unacceptable collusion. There was uncertainty about the extent to which students could discuss individual assignments, use structure or headings from previous students' work, or get assistance with proofreading and editing. This was compounded as there were different requirements for different assessments, and respondents felt that the university seemed to simultaneously encourage and penalise working with peers. As one respondent said, there was a feeling that the lines are quite blurry or ignored. Peers were also seen as compensating for a lack of clarity on assessments. One respondent here gives an example of a lack of guidance on structuring assessments that leads to students feeling lost. Comments like this help us to highlight areas where guidance and further practice that go beyond just academic integrity would be useful. It's interesting to note that while there was confusion over working with others, this was very rarely cited as a barrier to demonstrating academic integrity in practice. This could be because these discussions take place during the process of preparing an assessment and tend not to be visible in the final product. This uncertainty was also apparent when we asked respondents to assess whether specific scenarios constituted academic misconduct. I want to emphasise that we didn't assume there was a right or wrong answer to many of these scenarios. For example, in the 4th bar on the screen, we asked whether it was acceptable to use the structure and headings from previous students' work in a report. We can imagine some subject areas where reports always follow a prescribed structure and where this would be entirely normal. Similarly, students might be asked to work initially on a group task before producing an individual presentation at a later stage. Our aim was less to establish whether answers were correct and more to identify where there was greater uncertainty or more variation in what is acceptable across different task types. We found a general perception that submitting work which had been prepared elsewhere was unacceptable, as the figures for submitting an AI-generated essay or work you've submitted elsewhere show. But a higher proportion of respondents found it acceptable, for example, to work with a friend to prepare an individual presentation. This demonstrates an overall greater acceptance of assistance from peers or other individuals and for help received during the process of preparing an assessment, which the student being assessed could then work with. A third theme is around guidance and training. The vast majority of respondents agreed academic integrity was emphasised in their programme, but only just over half reported receiving guidance or training. This might reflect a lack of provision, but also a need for greater awareness raising around existing provision. The guidance and training that were received tended to be viewed very positively, although we did notice that this was almost always guidance on referencing rather than in other areas. Respondents had varied preferences for the format of guidance. Some preferred written guidance on Moodle, which they could consult any time, while others found dedicated classes or feedback from lecturers more useful, although all were welcomed. Additional guidance was requested on referencing and on acceptable use of AI tools in particular. Some respondents also referred to a lack of inclusivity around academic integrity policies. These were perceived as focused on designating good or bad work, rather than taking a more developmental approach, which would be appropriate across the diverse range of personal circumstances in which students are learning. So from our findings overall, it appears that there are gaps remaining between the aims of our guidance and the ways in which this is understood and used in practice. We would like to propose two key strategies to bridge this gap. The first is to enhance our guidance and training to ensure that they are visible, consistent, and contextualised. Our results indicate that existing resources on academic integrity are not always visible, so increased signposting to and embedding within courses is required. We can leverage the positive experiences students have had of guidance in different formats to raise awareness of support at different points in the academic year. We should also work on standardising our guidance on referencing. This doesn't mean everyone has to use the same citation system, as this will vary according to the norms of the discipline. But it's important that students receive the same guidance from everyone on exactly how that system should be used. We're recommending enhanced guidance and training at the course and programme level so that it can be contextualised in students' assessment tasks. As assessments become more varied, students will encounter different expectations. Some assignments will encourage working with others throughout, to a certain point, or not at all. Exam guidance and acceptable use of AI tools will also vary depending on what's being assessed. It's important that expectations and guidance for each assessment are delivered clearly in these areas as well as on referencing. Developing worked examples in collaboration with students allows us to address more directly the concerns that students have around academic integrity. Our second key strategy is at a more fundamental level, as we propose moving beyond the provision of guidance to a more holistic and developmental approach. This means understanding academic integrity as part of a wider set of academic literacies practices, the norms, expectations, and often the flexibilities that produce academic work in a discipline. So rather than focus on referencing, we work more broadly with students on effective use of sources. This means also exploring selection and evaluation of source materials, summarising, synthesising, and analysing sources. All of this takes time and requires frequent opportunities to practice and receive feedback. It's not something we can achieve through a page of guidance on Moodle, but which is best designed and embedded alongside students' core disciplinary work. We can explore where additional guidance on assessments would enhance opportunities for academic integrity. If students are carrying out activities such as structuring an assignment for the first time in summative assessments, we can then build in more formative tasks to practice these activities, independently or in class. Taking this more holistic approach means we can contextualise and explore academic integrity through academic practices that support learning throughout a course.